This episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlock Holmes scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, there were men that were dancing, creeping, and crooked, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? What's a tantalus? Or a gasogene? And what's the difference between a hansom cab and a four-wheeler?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 187, Justice, Part 3, Comeuppance. Well, hello there once again, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look at some of the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories and parse them out. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And I feel like the parsley sinking in the butter this July. It is July, after all. That is the month the parsley sunk in the butter, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. I don't connect that remark with a yes. Yeah, I guess I do.
It was a hot day. I don't know if they specifically called out July or not. That itself is a trifle. Well, that is neither here nor there. But what is here is this episode, which you can find at ihose.co/trifles187. That'll take you to the specific show notes for this episode, which are on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. If you haven't had a chance to visit our site, go ahead and pop on over there. You'll see the show notes for every episode available there, our archives, and the ability to support the show financially for as little as $1 a month. $1 a month, not even $1 an episode. Look at that. You can pay us 25 cents per episode and we'll be pleased. What a bargain that is. But every amount helps, and for those that donate at a particular level, a little higher, we do have some thank you gifts that we will be getting out in the second half of the year. So thank you in advance for your patience as we work through those, and thank you, of course, for being a regular listener. So on with the show. Well, we have had run-ins with the law, particularly justice, here on a couple of previous episodes. Episode 183 was Justice Part 1. That was things that were unresolved, and the reader was left to his or her imagination how things actually worked out, or hearing about things that perhaps didn't happen on the page and were described in retrospect a little later on. And then episode 184 was Justice Part 2, where we talked about a disproportionate meting out of justice when the punishment didn't fit the crime. So it stands to reason that Part 3 here, which is our final part in this three-part series on justice, is about comeuppance, those who got what they deserved. And boy, I can think of a handful just off the top of my head, but where would you like to start with this very juicy and fruitful episode, Bert?
Oh, great place to start is with the Speckled Band, and the Speckled Band gives us one of the most memorable villains in the canon, the terrible and powerful Grimsby Roylott, who is, spoiler alert, who is eager to obtain the resources associated with his stepdaughters without the burdens of their presence, and has as we will discover, a particularly fiendish way of arranging their removal from the scene.
Indeed, and I think it's safe to say that if you don't know what happens in the Speckled Band, that you shouldn't be listening to this show. This was the ultimate crime. It was, what's the term for, what's the side for killing your stepchild? I know patricide would be killing your father, but what's the term for killing your child? We got regicide.
Oh, good grief.
We got regicide is killing the king. Homicide is simply killing a human. I've often wondered when I go to the barber shop and I see that glass, that glass of blue liquid where they keep the combs. The label says barbicide, which ostensibly is the liquid in there that is neutralizing to all of the germs on the comb. But I think, regicide is killing the king. Homicide is killing a human. Barbicide, that must be killing your barber.
Yeah. Well, that's why those bottles are out there in the open, so that in the olden days when the barber shaved you with a straight razor, he knew that his own end could be delivered quite quickly and therefore was extra careful not to scratch your neck.
Well, whatever side we're on as far as killing your child goes, this was a heinous crime, and it was particularly well plotted out because Grimsby Roylott had to, he had to make arrangements in the house. He had to make structural changes. He had to, train the snake over many days or weeks. And of course, the two sisters' deaths were months apart. Yeah, this wasn't something that was just done as a crime of passion on the spur of the moment. So this is, and ultimately, what was at stake was their inheritance. So very, very clearly a crime of greed. And when you have a capital offense like that, then it stands to reason, of course, in those times that you would receive a capital punishment. And in this case, Grimsby Roylott was never brought to justice by virtue of the law. He answered to a higher authority, and in a completely ironic way, where Holmes said that he, struck at the bell pull and drove the snake back through the ventilator, and it released its fury, its snakish temper on the first person who it encountered, which of course was Grimsby Roylott.
Well, there's a couple of lovely things happening here. This is a very rare instance in the cases of Sherlock Holmes, and this is an iconic case, but this is one of the rare instances. In fact, it may be the only instance in the case of Sherlock Holmes where Holmes goes to the trouble before the denouement of completely underscoring and emphasizing the things that he has paid attention to ask Watson if he perceives their significance. So there's this, before the denouement, Watson is a little surprised. He says, Holmes, you're speaking of danger. Well, evidently you've seen more in these rooms than has been visible to me. Well, Holmes says, well, I imagine I saw everything you did. I've just deduced a little more. And then Watson says, well, I didn't see anything remarkable except the bell rope and how that could do anything since it wasn't connected to anything is just a mystery to me. And then Holmes says, you saw the ventilator too? Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't think that was very interesting. And then Holmes says, oh, I knew before we ever even came here that we should find a ventilator. And Watson's baffled. And Holmes says, well, you remember in her statement, she said that her sister could smell Dr. Roylott's cigar. Well, that suggested at once. So Holmes, and he goes on. And Watson says, but what harm can there be in that? And Holmes says, well, there's a curious coincidence of dates. A ventilator is made, a cord is hung, a lady who sleeps in the bed dies. Doesn't that strike you? And then Watson says, well, I didn't see any connection. And then Holmes says, didn't you observe anything peculiar about the bed? No. It was clamped to the floor. Did you? I mean, this is really extraordinary. You know, he's going point by point by point by point. And the lovely thing is, of course, this leads up to the observation, which has become the title of a BSI press book about Holmes and the medical profession. When a doctor goes wrong, he's the first of criminals because he has nerve and he has knowledge. And then Holmes mentions 2 such doctors who were among the heads of their profession. And so now we're really set up for this awful, for the punishment fitting the crime, for Grimsby Roylott essentially to be hoisted by his own petard. And the instrument of death that he would inflict upon his stepdaughter is now turned to him.
Ooh, chills. You know, the exchange, a number of the exchanges there over the course of a few paragraphs that you just mentioned almost seem cinematic in nature, in the way that they might make a great trailer for the episode or the story. To build that suspense and to make it very clear that they're up against some foe who is willing to stop at nothing to get exactly what he wants.
Yes, yes.
Well, we do have to stop right here to give our sponsor what they want, and that is your Comeuppance, so stay tuned. With each passing season brings another passing quarterly issue of the Baker Street Journal. This scholarly journal has been around since 1946, and each year produces 4 volumes, one for each season: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And a bonus Christmas annual. That's right, that's 5 issues every year of the Baker Street Journal, which consists of some of the best Sherlockian scholarship around the world. In each issue, you can read authors, people like yourself from all around the world and all around the Sherlockian societies, who write in with their theories on Dr. Watson's bullpup, Sherlock Holmes' proficiency on the violin, the appearance of Mycroft Holmes and Mrs. Hudson, and more. If you can imagine something interesting to write about in the Sherlock Holmes stories, then someone probably will. In the Baker Street Journal. Are you subscribed? Get over to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and make sure you are part of the BSJ tradition today. We are back talking about Justice, the third part of our Justice series here, where we talk about those villains who, get what's coming to them. Who else do we have in this fine lineup of people who got what they deserved?
One of the best is in The Illustrious Client, and it happens so early. Just as this, you look at the structure of what went on in the Speckled Band. The lead up to sketching in Grimsby Roylott and what will happen to him. Well, it's similarly beautifully done in The Adventure of the Illustrious Client. Even from the first sentence in the story, which begins with a quote from Holmes. Holmes says, "It can't hurt now," was Holmes's comment. "For the 10th time in as many years, I asked his leave to reveal the following narrative." And then Watson says, in some ways, this was the supreme moment of my friend's career. So right away, this is a big deal. Watson's been asking him for 10 years. Oh, all right. It can't hurt now, I suppose. So immediately what you find is that a knight of the realm, Sir James Damery, has come to Baker Street. And we have a little biographical information about why Watson was at Baker Street, this, that, and the other. And Sir James knows Watson. And immediately we get to the point. Sir James says to Holmes, "Have you ever heard of Baron Gruner?" And Holmes says, notice he's not looking up his commonplace book for this. He says, "You mean the Austrian murderer?" And so immediately Holmes has sized this guy up. And, so without getting any more into the mechanics of it, the case here involving Baron Gruner is one that's really a case of depraved manipulation of a handsome, apparently charismatic, continental nobleman who is really a very, very dark soul.
He really is, and to understand how desperate General de Merville was. Well, not just the general, but Violet's intended fiancé or intended paramour, to hire Sherlock Holmes to kind of break this spell that the Baron had cast over Violet. It shows you exactly what they thought of the Baron and his reputation. And we know that part of that reputation, in addition to being an Austrian murderer, was the ruination of so many females with which he had encounters. And of course his little black book, his binder full of women, as a previous political candidate would have called it, that held sway over their very livelihood and reputations. And until someone like Kitty Winter came forward, who was brave enough to set forth exactly what she could in front of Violet de Merville, there wasn't anyone else who could speak truth to power with respect to Baron Gruner.
Well, basically, the case, goes from descends slowly and inexorably. You learn more and more. I mean, that first identification of Gruner, the Austrian murderer, we find out in the sentences that immediately follow that he killed his wife and that he was only spared because a witness against him died suspiciously. So immediately this fellow has got the death of two people on his conscience, and then it gets darker and darker. And then, worst of all, we find out sort of midway through the case that now that Baron Gruner is aware of Sherlock Holmes' engagement, there's a murderous attack on Sherlock Holmes, that he's actually assaulted. So this guy is really being set up for a horrible end.
He really was. Now, I'm blanking a little bit on this. I remember the dramatization of this story more vividly than I do the printed version. But in the Granada version, Kitty Winter was not only emotionally scarred, but she was physically scarred from vitriol that the Baron threw at her. Was that included in this story, or am I just imagining that from the dramatization?
That is a good question, because I remember that as well. I'm just looking for the introduction of Kitty Winter, because we learn a lot from Kitty Winter. She's the one who tells us about the Baron's book and so on, and I'm just trying to find. No, she isn't.
Yeah.
Beside him, a slim, flame-like young woman with a pale, intense face, youthful, and yet so worn with sin and sorrow that one read the terrible years which had left their mark upon her. This is Miss Kitty Winter. Oh, well, she'll speak for herself. I'm easy to find. She's an old maid of Porky Shinwell. No, so she is, she wears the weary impact of the way she's been living on her features, but she's not herself scarred.
But, that's just a bit of dramatic license then to clearly signify, exactly to what extent the Baron would go to teach those that he wished to harm that he was the one who held the power, and how he could leave them ruined, either by reputation or by looks, in his wake. And that's, again, great irony here. Here is a man, a Don Juan of sorts, who obviously took great pride in his romantic abilities, and part of that comes with his looks. He talked about I think Kitty Winter talked about his tidy habits, and Watson remarked about his insect-like antenna of a mustache. Obviously very well kept and very specific about his habits. So this type of individual would, of course, prize his good looks above pretty much all else. And so toward the conclusion of the story, we understand from Watson, according to the narration, and then it was done in an instant, and yet I clearly saw it. An arm, a woman's arm, shot out from among the leaves. At the same instant, the Baron uttered a horrible cry, a yell which will always ring in my memory. He clapped his two hands to his face and rushed round the room, beating his head horribly against the walls. Then he fell upon the carpet, rolling and writhing, while scream after scream resounded through the house. "Water, for God's sake! Water!" It was his cry. I seized a carafe from a side table and rushed to his aid. At the same moment, the butler and several footmen ran from the hall. I remember that one of them fainted as I knelt by the injured man and turned that awful face to the light of the lamp. The vitriol was eating into it everywhere and dripping from the ears and the chin. One eye was already white and glazed. The other was red and inflamed. The features which I had admired a few minutes before were now like some beautiful painting over which the artist has passed a wet and foul sponge. They were blurred, discolored, inhuman, terrible.
Well, it's interesting. We know that we owe the Sign of Four to a dinner that Conan Doyle was at with Oscar Wilde that also resulted in the creation of Wilde's great story, The Picture of Dorian Gray. And so when you look at that description of the dissolving features of Baron Gruner, you sort of some of us think about the true portrait of Dorian, the disfigured portrait that's aging and reflects all of his sins in the attic. But a couple of interesting things going on there. One is that she is never identified except by Baron Gruner. It's Baron Gruner who says, "Oh my God, that's Kitty Winter. She'll pay for this." But the other thing is, Holmes is clearly shocked by this. In fact, Watson tells us even his iron nerves had been shocked by the events of the evening, and he listened with horror to my account of the Baron's transformation and says, "The wages of sin, Watson, the wages of sin, sooner or later it will always come. And God knows there was sin enough." And of course, Holmes has the Baron's lust diary, and it's a good thing he does too, because he knows that Mr. Merville would be caring for this disfigured Baron as a martyr. But in fact, the sexual predator is revealed by his own book. And so it's the book that's going to make it all very clear to her, the true state of affairs.
Well, I'm reminded of a stanza from a song that we know from Sherlockian circles. They told her the wages of sinners was death. To this my Aunt Clara just said that she'd just as soon die with champagne on her breath and pink satin sheets on her bed. And that is just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
does in truth recoil upon the violent. And the schemer falls into the pit which he digs for another.